One thing that's been brought up in this whole issue is that Colorado is not necessarily a particularly red-leaning state, so the stakes for Trump in all this, even though it's a historic ruling and we've never seen this happen before, it's not particularly that big of an issue because it's kind of a question of whether he would actually win the state in the first place. But all of the democracy folks are a bit quiet today because there's all these degrees of opinions floating out there from RFK Jr. saying this is a disgrace, we shouldn't be having this, all the way to certain legal scholars who actually thought that the court got it right, all the way to ones that thought they didn't. No one's completely on the same picture.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by Supreme Court reporter Kaelan Deese. Kaelan, former President Donald Trump booted from the ballot in Colorado by the state Supreme Court. Explain to us a little bit about what the 14th Amendment is in terms of why this would be an issue and what the legal argument is for why he's not eligible to be president again.
Yeah, so with all the vastness of the 14th Amendment, this case focuses in on Section 3, which is talking about a so-called insurrection clause of Section 3 that holds that anyone who engaged in insurrection, any officer who engaged in insurrection cannot be on a ballot for election for whatever office it is. And so this is essentially, charging that, Trump is an officer of the United States who, because of his election fraud claims and because he called on people to come to the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, that their actions and his support of these election fraud claims, like the coalescing of that, all amounted to him not just inciting an insurrection, but also engaging it, according to this 4-3 decision by this full slate of Democratic appointed justices on the Colorado Supreme Court. So it basically comes down to them, finding that sort of taking a district court judge's holding that Trump did incite an insurrection and amplifying that to hold that he can't be on the ballot because that district court said that he could be on the ballot, on the primary ballot, that is.
So, back in the Clinton era, we always talked about it depends on what the meaning of is. This really hinges on what the definition of an insurrection is. The 14th Amendment was a Civil War era amendment, initially intended to keep people from the Confederacy from rejoining the federal government.
That's right.
But there's now dispute over what other examples this could potentially apply to as well.
Oh yeah, there's a whole host of different variables at play here. Not to mention that there's the idea that because there's so many of these other similar challenges in other states, that this could create a sort of a downward spiral for Trump, where maybe he's being taken off ballots all across the board. One thing that's been brought up in this whole issue is that Colorado is not necessarily a particularly red-leaning state, so the stakes for Trump in all this, even though it's a historic ruling and we've never seen this happen before, it's not particularly that big of an issue because it's kind of a question of whether he would actually win the state in the first place. But all of the democracy folks are a bit quiet today because there's all these degrees of opinions floating out there from RFK Jr. saying this is a disgrace, we shouldn't be having this, all the way to certain legal scholars who actually thought that the court got it right, all the way to ones that thought they didn't. No one's completely on the same picture, and so it's kind of creating dissonance there too, because normally people who might find some common ground on certain issues can't seem to find it today.
So what's next, at least in terms of next steps, not necessarily what other legal rulings on this will be?
Yeah, so one thing that my most important takeaway, the first thing I said after I read the opinion, was that this is entirely stayed at the moment. Stayed as in it's not in effect, at least until January 4th, which is the timeline essentially that Trump has to file his formal petition to the Supreme Court, which he inevitably will be doing probably sometime after Christmas, ahead of that deadline. So Essentially, the next steps are here to see if the Supreme Court wants to take a stab at this. At the same time, the Supreme Court is currently toiling on whether to take up a special counsel Jack Smith's petition. That's in a completely separate case that is asking the Supreme Court, does Trump have immunity from his 2 federal criminal prosecutions, which, I mean, that's largely seen by people as a sort of delay tactic. A lot of people think that the Nixon precedent doesn't, allow for that, but that's besides the point. For all intents and purposes, the Supreme Court is going to be sort of juggling 2 Trump-related things at this time, and so it's kind of, prompting people to say, well, the Bush v. Gore was this, massive post-2000 election challenge that everyone remembers not too fondly, and the election hasn't even happened yet, and we're already, wading into the Supreme Court possibly having a bigger hand in the 2024 election before the first ballots are even cast. So,
and unlike in Bush v. Gore, Trump has put 3 justices on the Supreme Court at the time that they would be ruling on this.
Yeah, so it's definitely, I mean, for someone like Chief Justice John Roberts, this, even if Trump hadn't put any justices on the court, this isn't something he would particularly want to have to weigh in on. But the fact that, there's so much connection now between Trump and this court, and all the things that, people, say that, Trump's appointees have sort of caused, and the effect that he's had on the legacy of this court, it's now kind of coalescing into this dicey, thorny situation for the justices.
Courting controversy. Thank you, Kaelan.
Thank you.
You can read Kaelan and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.